I absolutely love these blitz battles between Alireza and Magnus, and this one is no exception. Now, this was played in the title Tuesday on the 28th of February, but Magnus finds himself down to just 41 seconds when he plays his first move. So if I play the first couple of moves, you can see the clock times update here, and this is the challenge he's now up against. Let's see what Magnus can do in this game. Can he hold on? So Alireza, he goes knight f3, knight c6, and bishop b5 starts the Roy Lopez. Now a6 kicks the bishop. We don't see an exchange variation. It drops back. Knight f6 develops. Castle's played, bishop e7, and Alireza now covers his e-pawn, activates the rook, and with that one protected, there is a threat to eliminate and win the e-pawn. So Magnus breaks the pin. The bishop drops back. He castles, and now if Alireza goes pawn c3 here, well then you can get hit with d5, the Marshall Gambit. So there are a number of so-called anti-Marshall moves. Alireza goes d3 in this game, but we've also seen h3, such as by Nepo in the World Championship. I myself faced a4 just last night, got absolutely crushed, don't want to talk about it. But what Alireza plays here is d3. Magnus goes d6, so no Marshall, just the solid setup. And now c3 is important, not only preparing d4, but giving the bishop some escape square, because after knight a5, which Magnus plays, well now you can nudge back, and when Magnus went d6, the pawn was defended. That's why the knight can't win the pawn when it moves over to a5 over here. Now, once the bishop retreats, c5 is played, and this is the big point of clearing this knight, is then you can move the c-pawn, and after Alireza develops, it just hops back. Yes, you've lost time, but look at the grip you've now helped maintain over d4. That's why black plays like this. Knight f1 spins the knight round. Both players play these pawn moves, of course, very grandmasterly, right? Give the king some room. Now rook e8 from Magnus. Knight e3 looks at these light squares here, and after bishop e6 from Magnus, good developing. I mean, look at the clock time. He's back where he started, just playing his moves instantly. Great moves. Well, here Alireza plays an aggressive way, but not the best way. So the computer actually wants bishop to b3 here, because now if you try d5, you could also go a4 there, by the way, but this is one of the top moves. But the idea is you leave the knight on f3, because then if d5, you capture. Once you get this kind of liquidation, well, the problem is the e-pawn. You've got rook and knight on it. There's only one defender. It's no good for black. So black can't break with d5 here. Black has other moves, but you can't do that one. But what Alireza does is knight h2, opening his queen, bringing the knight to here, very aggressive. But now Magnus can break. Absolutely correct, because the pressure's been alleviated on d5, and that's adequately protected. So queen f3, this is Alireza's idea, and after d4 taking more space, he jumps the knight into f5, and Magnus just tucks back this bishop, keeps the dark squared one on the board, and adds some protection to these squares. And now bishop b3, and Magnus says, wow, he's provoking me to play c4. Okay, I'm easily enough provoked. Chat can get me provoked, so can Alireza. Fine, I'll do it. Now Alireza captures, the pawn recaptures. What's the idea? Why would you give the tempo? Well, now bishop a4, once that pawn captured, you open this diagonal. You pressure the knight, you x-ray the rook behind. Black keeps a small advantage here, but okay, Alireza just mixing it up. Good policy in time pressure. This rook comes across, defends the knight, and now knight g4 carries on with these aggressive intentions. And here Magnus, he could have actually taken on g4. He looked at this after the game, and after pawn recaptures, he was looking at something like f6, just to stop any g5 shenanigans, as he says. He could even start with queen a5 here, pressure this bishop, x-ray this diagonal, allow g5. It's not actually that scary. But, okay, in the game, he takes here instead. I mean, he's playing on seconds. His decision-making really is excellent, because then he finds this sequence of moves, pawn to e4. And this is such good calculation with seconds on the clock. It truly is. Because after takes here with check, queen recaptures, you're giving white a pawn. As Alireza now takes, best continuation. But this is what Magnus has seen. He can capture that rook, queen recaptures, and then take on c3, and he's winning his pawn back by force. Now, there's no time for white to take this knight, even if you wanted to do that, because there's a threat here to take on b2, fork these two pieces. So pawn recaptures is forced. Then Magnus takes, however, and hits the unprotected rook in the corner. So again, no time for white to pick up this loose knight now. So the rook moves across. And now Magnus has different moves here to equalise. He was looking at knight d4. Computer talks about knight b4 or rook b8. Magnus goes for this one of queen d3. So he's hitting both of these pieces. The queen can't leave the diagonal, forces the exchange, pawn recaptures, but now Alireza is a little bit better after bishop to e3. He's got the bishop pair on an open board, plus his pieces are just a bit more actively placed at the moment. So Magnus goes knight e5, centralises the knight, covers this pawn. But after rook d1, immediately starting to pressure it, rook d8 defending, we now see Magnus go wrong. Because bishop b3 is played, good move, covering knight c4 jumps, also stopping f6, and now Magnus should activate this bishop, say with bishop e7, bishop b4, both decent moves when you run it with the engine, but he goes pawn a5. Creating a pawn weakness. Now, can you see how Alireza took advantage of this one? So what did Alireza play here? He went bishop to b6, double attack on the rook and the pawn. And you can't lift the rook to d5 where it defends pawn and this pawn because of course the bishop covers the square. So it slides across to the a file, covers the pawn, but now bishop c7. So good from Alireza. Magnus down to 5 seconds. Now he can't defend the knight as we've said. If he moves the knight he loses the pawn, but what else to do? It's his only option. Alireza now a pawn up, but Magnus does get knight c5, forking rook and bishop, therefore winning back one of those bishops, and here Alireza, he chooses the wrong endgame. So he goes rook d5, so logical, centralising, but actually his best was rook to d8, because now after captures, which is forced, bishop recaptures, knight takes here. The problem with this endgame after something like bishop b4 to defend the pawn is that white's going to bring this king around very quickly, and this pawn is just always a long-term weakness attacked by the bishop. So not only is black a pawn down, but likely to become 2 pawns down. Should be a lost endgame, as Magnus says himself. But rook d5 played, and now Magnus gets to go here, pawn recaptures, and importantly he liquidates this a pawn. And after captures, rook captures, well now you've got the 4 on 3, but you do have to be careful as we'll see. So rook d8 played, big threat to go bishop d6, pin that piece, win it. So Magnus covers the threat. And now g4 and f6, and although Magnus is hemmed in, his king is running out to break that pin. King g2, rook c6 hits the bishop, it drops, now the king activates, rook d7 checks, bishop e7 covers, rook b7, king f8 breaks the pin, and now Alireza starts marching in with his king. We get a check, king goes, the rook comes here. This plays for time on the clock, of course, and they're pretty much neck and neck now. Now we see a few more moves. I'm just going to move through these ones here because we now get a nice sequence. So bishop c5 from Magnus. He walks into a self-pin, which Alireza takes advantage of. But this is what he's seen. So astute in the tactics. Look at the 1 second on his clock. And now after Alireza takes, which is basically forced, then this bishop recaptures, and now we're in an endgame where it's difficult for white to make inroads. But be careful, because if, for example, you swap these bishops, not that Magnus would, well now it's completely lost. You can see the eval bar go, because the king will march in, take the opposition, and there's too many kind of waiting pawn moves that you can do, and you can eventually generate a passed pawn. It's no good. So you have to keep the bishops on the board, and this is what we now see from Magnus. So I'm going to run this through here. We'll fast forward some moves. We get to here, g6 from Magnus, and Alireza captures. If he advances, just to show this one more time, and the bishops aren't on the board, well then it's a lost endgame, completely lost. But with the bishops on the board, the advance gets nowhere, because Magnus can keep waiting with his bishop. You can never budge this king and pawn combo. But coming back here, we see captures with check, king takes, bishop f4, bishop e7, and these were now the final moves. The pawn drops, the players agree a draw. Great battle between these two. If you want to see another game from Alireza Firouzja, then check out the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching and see you soon.